Hi, my name is Joey Greiner, and from the spring of 2020 through the winter of 2022, I hosted a weekly show called Coherence, where each week I would interview a different guest that was a spiritual teacher, wellness facilitator, conscious entrepreneur of some kind, and learn about their practice and their own personal journey of how they discovered that particular path and how they were able to turn it into their purpose. I recorded about almost 50 episodes in that time. And in that duration, I never did an episode explaining my own story and how I became interested in all of these topics and why I decided to start sharing about them. So that is what today's episode is going to be, about 2.5 years after the recording of the last of that batch of episodes. On the recording of this, it is July 18th, 2024, the day before my 39th birthday. And I'm very excited to bring this project back and to start to share with the world on a bigger scale some of the amazing facilitators, teachers, and wonderful humans that I've encountered along my path that are really doing fantastic things for humanity. And I'm really excited to share more of those stories with you. But before we get into those, I felt it only appropriate to share a bit about my own journey and why I decided to start connecting with this particular area of interest and start sharing about it. Again, my name is Joey Greiner and am from New York. I grew up about 30 minutes outside of the city in the suburbs on Long Island. My neighborhood that I grew up in was fairly conservative, but also somewhat multicultural and a bit open-minded in that regard. I went to public elementary school, but chose to go to Catholic school for middle and high school because I felt the education quality would be much better and I would have more opportunities for the future if I did so. And being that my parents were born in New York and several of my grandparents as well, some of my great-grandparents came from Europe, from Germany, Poland, England. We don't have any direct connection to that culture, to any of those traditions and practices. We're very, very Americanized in my family. And that really led me to be interested in other cultures. And growing up in the Roman Catholic Church, that was the only tradition that my family on all sides had really connected with and grown up with. So I really resonated with that. I loved the tradition, the pageantry of it, the spectacle of it, the music, the architecture, and I was very involved as a child. I was an altar boy, an altar server when I was young, and then as I got older into high school, I became a Eucharistic minister, someone who shares the communion with the people at church towards the end of Mass. And in my high school, I was an athlete and involved in several of the spiritual clubs and in the school chorus all the way throughout my senior year of high school. And I would say that my big shift towards questioning things in reality began probably around when I was 11 years old. And my older cousin showed me the band Rage Against the Machine. And they had just had an album come out called Evil Empire. And I was blown away by that music and digging into their collection and looking at the album artwork and the series of books in there and listening to those lyrics, I realized that so much of the mainstream narrative that we've been told from history books, from the news, from indoctrination in school had been washed over, and we've been fed so many lies and untruths, and that really got me to start to questioning things at such a young age. And there's not a lot of activity for a revolutionary minded middle schooler in the suburbs, but that passion kept me alive and really interested throughout my high school years. And when I was about 16, I tried out for the varsity lacrosse team and did not make the team. And that was a big shift for me because I was identifying myself as a student athlete, and that was part of my identity. When I didn't make the team, that was pretty devastating for me. And at that point, I started hanging out with some other friends after school and started to smoke marijuana and experiment with other states of consciousness in that regard. And while that was not the most productive for me, it allowed me a different way of seeing reality and seeing things. And not long after, still around maybe 17 years old, I tried my first experimentation with psilocybin mushrooms. And that blew my consciousness wide open. So I felt completely connected with the universe, with nature, and I felt like everything made sense, that I could see everything in perspective, and I felt where I fit in, where my role was. And that was such a profound experience for me that I repeated maybe a dozen or so times between the ages of 17 and 22 or so throughout college. And I would say another massive spiritual shift for me was my junior year of college when I discovered yoga and meditation. I'd been really interested in different Eastern philosophies, and it was really beautiful to be able to start practicing those myself. So I started going to the meditation club, which was a weekly gathering at my school, and then the yoga club, which was not a traditional Indian hatha or vinyasa type yoga practice. The teachers were from a Korean practice. At the time, they were called Dan Yoga or Dan Hak, and now they're referred to as body and brain. But what was beautiful about that practice is that it relies heavily on energy work, similar to Qigong or Tai Chi. That was the first time I ever experienced for myself the universal life force energy. Being able to connect, feeling that tingling sensation between my hands and being able to send that energy throughout my body and my body's energy centers was a completely mind-blowing experience for me, especially someone who'd grown up loving Star Wars and the Force, and then realizing that this subtle energy really did exist was such a game changer for me. Also in college, I put my interest in politics to work with my degree and studied political science, specializing in international relations, and I studied abroad 3 times in Europe, traveling across different cities, and all along that same time was still mistrustful of the mainstream narrative and realized that the news was constantly lying to us. And this was around early 2000s. I was 16 in high school when 9/11 happened, and we just got flooded with propaganda and patriotism to get certain public support behind some policies that were, of course, now we know, disastrous. And I was certainly questioning things at that time. And when I was in college, I came across many documentaries that really were expanding my perspectives of things. And I went down many deep rabbit holes of conspiracy theories, questioning official narratives of many public events, and also learning about the power structures of the world. That while I was in school, learning about different organizations that are above board, like the United Nations and European Union and all these things. In my own study, I was learning about some of these more secretive organizations, some secret societies, but also some think tanks that are quite out in the open, but nobody really knows what they do, but they're super influential. And I really needed to know how the world worked and went down super deep, dark rabbit holes, which led to some paranoia and definitely a distrust of everything. And especially when I started learning about interdimensional beings, particularly learning from like David Icke and people like that, my friends and family definitely thought I was quite a bit out there. And this definitely stressed me out. And I was so grateful to have discovered meditation and yoga and the spiritual practice to kind of rebalance myself and realize that everything is as it should be. And even though there are horrible events happening in the world all the time, and there are people abusing and misusing others, we're exactly where we're supposed to be. And we can just focus on ourselves, try to be the best version of ourselves to navigate through the day to day, and then we can start to help others. So I was very grateful to discover my spirituality in that path. This was about my junior year of college. So I was about 20 years old, 21 years old. And then my senior year, I started to get a little bit of FOMO and realized that, oh no, I only have a year of college left. Let me get as much of that experience of the quintessential college life in. So I started partying a lot more and going into Manhattan, into the city to go to clubs and start dancing. And this is another big shift in my life because, as I said, I've always been so passionate about music. And while I was studying abroad in Europe, I got to experience some of the best club culture and electronic dance music in the world, going to these massive clubs around Europe, coming back to New York, being underage and can't get into any of the places. I met a friend who was a couple years older who had been in nightlife for a while and was DJing and invited me to some of his DJ gigs. And since I was with him, I was able to get into some of those places while still being underage. Nobody really knew or cared at the time. And that is where I learned how to DJ and really fell in love with New York City nightlife and electronic dance music. And when I graduated college, I realized that I did not want to spend my days in an office behind a desk, and I didn't think that lifestyle was fitting for me at all. So I got a job working in nightclubs as a promoter, and I actually ended up doing pretty well at that and had a good following of people that would come out with me to the clubs 5, sometimes 6 nights a week. And with that, I definitely indulged in alcohol, and I went overboard on numerous occasions for sure. When you have unlimited alcohol at your disposal, when you're working in the clubs every night, there's always an occasion to celebrate someone's birthday or something to celebrate that people that you're hosting want you to drink and celebrate with them. So I would go through bouts of sobriety for 3 months here, 6 months there, because after many, many mornings of feeling embarrassed, of not knowing what I said or did the night before, that I might have embarrassed myself or upset someone, I realized that was not a way that I wanted to continue to live. Thankfully, I never got into drugs, but alcohol was definitely an issue for me in my 20s. And around the time of my 30th birthday, shortly thereafter, I decided it was a time for a big change in my life. And I was about 9 months into my sobriety journey, and my girlfriend at the time had to go back to France because her visa was expiring in the US and she needed to return to Europe. And I took that as a perfect opportunity to make a big change in my life. I'd always wanted to live in Europe, and I'd always wanted to go back to school and do my master's. So it was perfect timing for me to move with her to Paris. And I found an international MBA in English in Paris and was living there just a few short weeks later. And it was perfect because I needed some time off from the party scene and from nightlife, and I really wanted to go back into my education and figure out what the next step of my career was going to be. And while I was there in Paris, I was also able to DJ, and I really took an interest in entrepreneurship. I was recommended to check out some meetups and gatherings at some really interesting spaces that were incubator and accelerator programs for startups, where I would go and hear founders talk about their projects. And that was really inspiring and invigorating for me. So by the time my classes ended and I needed to do an internship to validate my MBA, there was a brand new place opening that was such an incredible project I was so excited about, called Station F, built in a 1920s Paris train station that was renovated to be this tech hub with about 1,000 startups working there every day in a little over 30 different incubator and accelerator programs. For example, every few months, Facebook would sponsor a new cohort of about a dozen startups working on big data, or Microsoft would take a cohort that were working on AI, and so on. And as they were just about to open, I got the job as their first community manager on their communications team. So I was responsible for their social media presence, blog posts, email blasts to the community, stuff like that. And that was so interesting because I got to connect with so many different managers of these accelerator programs, venture capital investors, startup founders, and investors, all these kinds of really interesting people working on really cool projects. And some of the investors and advisors, people that have been around for a while, said it reminded them of San Francisco and Silicon Valley in the early 2000s. Really exciting time with a lot of inspiring energy. So for 6 months, I worked on the staff of Station F and got to really learn so much as I worked on my MBA thesis and developed a social media content strategy for them. And at the end of that contract, the app that I had been developing with a friend was accepted into one of the accelerator programs, which was very exciting. So I moved from the staff to being a resident entrepreneur at the space. At one of my DJ gigs that previous summer, I was approached by a guy who liked my music and wanted to talk about DJing and events and stuff like that. And he shared with me that he had created an app for meeting people at music festivals. And we met up, and after our conversation, decided that I would be his co-founder and help him market that product and create this really awesome tool for people to meet through events, at first music events, but all kinds of events. We got accepted into that startup accelerator, and it was really exciting. I will share at this time that I had never used a dating app before, and I had just ended the relationship with the woman that brought me to France. In my second year in Paris, I was finally learning the French language because I didn't have anyone to translate for me, and then trying out these dating apps while simultaneously building one. It was a really interesting time in my life there. Our app used Facebook events at the time, which were really popular for people to organize and invite people to things. And it was really easy for users to swipe through the profiles of other people that were invited to or interested or going to some of the same events that were coming up, or even in the past. So you could see who had similar interests of events and find a pool of candidates to connect with that had similar interests in events and things they liked to go to. So we had a pretty good start, and had a few thousand users at first. And it was really exciting to be in that entrepreneurial environment, connecting with other founders and advisors and people doing really, really cool projects. Until one day, Facebook had their scandal with Cambridge Analytica, and they had that whole data privacy breach where they overnight cut off every external app developers access to Facebook user data, which overnight rendered our app nearly useless. And at that time, we tried to find some workarounds, implementing other platforms like Eventbrite and Meetup and other ticketing platforms, but it became too burdensome for the user to onboard and log into each of those platforms individually. So we decided to abandon that project, and I returned home to New York. So this is about fall 2018, and I came back to New York and unsure what I was going to do with my life. I started DJing a little bit again and attending entrepreneur meetups and startup meetups and checking out new tech projects and seeing what was happening in the incubators and accelerators around New York. And I was invited to take a meeting with a friend of a friend who had a hospitality startup. And with my background in nightlife and community, this seemed like a really interesting project, and they invited me to their office for a meeting. And this office was at a co-working space called the Assemblage. And that would be one of the biggest shifts of my life to date, walking through those doors of the Assemblage for the first time, seeing the preserved moss on the walls in the shape of sacred geometry, and seeing the giant crystals and essential oils, seeing the beautiful elixir bar, and just feeling like I was in this beautiful sanctuary in New York City. And right away, I was obsessed and wanted to be part of that place. So I went on their website, saw they were hiring in their marketing department, which was perfect because I had just finished my MBA in digital marketing and was working at this incredible startup hub in Europe that, combining that experience with my interest in spirituality, really seemed like the perfect fit. So I was so excited. And I had a few interviews that went really well, and I noticed that the people that were interviewing me were all being let go. I realized after speaking to some members and employees that they were experiencing some financial difficulties in this project. And I stopped trying to get hired by them, but still wanted to be around this amazing community. I then found a job with a blockchain project, which was very interesting. And in that company, I was building community through events and blog posts and creating group chats and things like that. And I was the only one in New York. So I was able to convince them to sign up my membership at the Assemblage as my office instead of getting a desk in a WeWork or something like that. So I would describe the Assemblage as WeWork meets Soho House meets Burning Man. So it was a beautiful members club and co-working space that had an intersection between conscious, purpose-driven founders and investors and spiritual people kind of all in one building. And I needed to be a part of it, and I was so excited to be in that community. So I was working with this blockchain project and involved in the community every day, going to all of the different offerings that they had. So one day would be yoga, one day would be meditation, one day would be breath work, one day would be Reiki, one day would be a cacao ceremony, and I went to everything. I was just so hooked into learning about all of these different wellness modalities and making friends and connecting with people. Amazing for me. And while my day job was interesting to me, I really enjoyed learning about blockchain and crypto. My work environment was not the most healthy. Being the only person in the New York office was really an interesting dynamic, and also my relationship with my boss was not the healthiest one. Being in this beautiful, serene office space, and then every time getting a message from her, getting chest pains because I knew I was going to get some kind of verbal abuse once I opened any kind of communication with her. It was just not a good situation. So quit that job after 6 months, and after having become really involved in the Assemblage community, I was able to get a role with them of brand ambassador, which was not a paid role, but included free access to all of the clubhouses and the community events and stuff like that in exchange for hosting some events. And I pitched them the idea of their podcast, which they had a beautiful podcast studio, and I'd never seen anybody using it. So with all of the relationships that I'd built with all of the wonderful facilitators of these different wellness practices that they were offering, I had a whole lineup of guests that were ready to share their stories and learn about their amazing wellness practices and spiritual practices. So I approached Rodrigo Nino, the founder of the Assemblage, to be the first guest. And he said, of course. But then he sidetracked me into working on another project that he was very passionate about. And I was glad to assist him in that, because he had been a very successful real estate developer and the founder of this incredible community. So I was really excited to spend some one-on-one time with him. And he created the Assemblage in a vision that he had under the influence of the plant medicine ayahuasca. About 10 years previous, he had a cancer diagnosis that left him with a 50-50 chance of survival using modern Western medicine. And not liking those odds, he returned to his native Colombia and went to the jungle and found some shaman and drank this plant medicine that gave him these visions of connecting his communities of his successful business friends and investor friends and Burning Man friends and spiritual friends and entrepreneurs all into one community where the access to capital and purpose-driven business and spirituality could all come together, and that became the Assemblage. So the program that he sidetracked me from the podcast to work on was a game called Akasha, the Game of Life. And it was a narrative game that would take your own gene keys and turn that into a narrative storyline. To explain the gene keys, I'm going to have to take a few steps back to human design, and behind that, the I Ching. So first, the I Ching is the ancient Chinese book of divination. It's over 6,000 years old, and no one knows who wrote it. And it's based on 64 different hexagrams, which are a series of long and short lines, which when you toss some feng shui coins or certain type of sticks to see how they land, and you can see which of those 64 hexagrams they form, and look up in the book the corresponding energy that goes through that to find the divination practice there that you need to work with. And then from the I Ching, there was an American salesman named Ra Uru, which is his spiritual name, who was on a psychedelic journey in Ibiza in the 80s when he downloaded this system of human design based on those 64 hexagrams in the I Ching, connecting them, calling them gates or energetic pathways in the body, overlaying that with astrology and the time and place you were born when your energy entered your physical body, and the energy pathways of traditional Chinese medicine, like the meridians of acupuncture, acupressure, all of these things overlapped onto the human body, creating the system of human design. And Ra'uru did not know any of those systems, but he just happened to receive all of that all at once, and it took him years to put that system together. So human design I describe as an owner's manual for your individual spirit and body on this incarnation in this time. When your soul enters your body at a very specific place and time, it's imbued with certain character attributes and strengths and weaknesses. So what human design does is it teaches you to play to your strengths, so you don't run around in circles trying to fit yourself into a path that doesn't work for you. It teaches you how to navigate this world relying on your own personal strengths. And then from there, human design had a next evolution. There is a gentleman named Richard Rudd, who's from the UK, and he was one of the early students of human design. And he had a vision to incorporate those 64 different gates in human design, but he realized that those were keys that correlated to the 64 different genes of our human DNA. So each of those 64 hexagrams from the I Ching into the 64 gates of human design are all the same as the keys in the gene keys, which are the 64 genes of our DNA. And in this game, Akasha, the game of life, we would, in each level, open up one of our keys in the gene keys and follow along the path of self-discovery. The name Akasha comes from the Akashic records, which is also known as the collective unconscious or the book of life. So the Akashic records are an infinite realm of knowledge and wisdom that we can't reach, but we can, through certain meditation practices, connect with the librarians of the Akashic records and ask specific questions. So we can't read them ourselves, but we can ask the questions that we need to know and receive those answers. So this game, Akasha, the game of life, would use the narrative of opening our Akashic records each day and following along the path of self-discovery by reading our gene key for that day and contemplating on it. That game was initially launched in, I believe it was the spring of 2019, and I volunteered to be one of the community leaders working on that project, and it was very interesting and exciting for me. The game, as it was initially released, took way too long for people to get to the really interesting parts. It took a week to unlock the next level, and people really started to fade off and lose interest in the game. So when we relaunched it a year later, the decision was made to, instead of make people wait a week to unlock the next episode, the next level, that they would be able to do it after 24 hours. And that was much more interesting to keep people engaged and communally sharing about their journeys of self-discovery. What I was working on with Rodrigo in the podcast room at the Assemblage that winter of 2020 was coming up with meditations to lead the people through the exercises on this online game. So they would drop into a meditative state and prepare to open their Akashic records or read their gene key for the day. And that was a very interesting time to be connecting with Rodrigo and learning from him every day, because a few months prior, his cancer had returned and he knew that he probably didn't have much time left. He was urgently trying to get this work out into the world because he just felt how important it was for people to be able to discover their passions and their purpose. And I felt like that was such a beautiful project that I was honored to be a part of it. And we had some really cool visitors as well come and see us in the podcast studio. Like one day, Deepak Chopra came and we recorded a meditation with him about death. And he and Rodrigo had a beautiful conversation that we recorded as well. And Rodrigo noticed that as reports were coming in from overseas about the virus that was about to take the world, he noticed right away that this was going to be a big, big shift globally. He was like, this is it. This is the thing that's going to change the world. This is like the time of awakening. It's coming. And as we all know, that prediction certainly came true. So in March 2020, when the world went into a lockdown, the Assemblage closed its doors as well because people weren't renting office space or going to social clubs at that time. And we moved the programming of the Assemblage online through the Facebook page and Zoom calls. So the game of Akasha was launched in that spring of 2020. And we did it as a 28-day launch where in the morning there would be a Zoom call and Rodrigo would lead the meditation, and people would after that go into the game, open up their gene key for the day and contemplate on it, meditate on it, and then share in the Facebook group. And we had up to 1,000 people that were actively playing that game all together and sharing about it, which was incredible. And we did it one more time, one more 28-day cycle. And towards the end of that, Rodrigo was not well enough to lead those morning meditations every day, and some friends would fill in. And on the 28th day, the final day of that second round, his ex-wife, Juanita, who was also a co-founder of the Assemblage, shared that he was so happy that his vision had been sent out into the world and there were so many people actively learning about the gene keys and playing Akasha. And then that following day he transitioned from his earthly body into the spirit world. So that was a very powerful activation for me to be around him and involved in that project in the community at that time, especially since about 2 weeks prior we had a fireside chat where I interviewed him on Zoom with about 500 people of his close friends and family and members of the community, and asked him about what it was like knowing that he was in his final days and whether he had any fears or regrets. And it was a very, very powerful experience for me, for that responsibility to have a conversation with someone who was so impactful on so many lives in such a delicate time in their life. So that was maybe the second or third interview I had ever done. And that was really, really potent for me. And I'm so grateful to Rodrigo for everything I learned from him and everything that he built, and massively grateful to the Assemblage community. And this was the late spring, early summer of 2020. And the Assemblage was closed. We were still carrying on with some programming on Facebook Live and Zoom for the community, but there was no budget to pay staff. It was all community driven at that point. And I was the only one continuing to do a weekly show after a certain point. And each week had another guest sharing their story about how they found their spiritual or wellness path and how they were able to turn it into their lifestyle and livelihood. And I really enjoyed doing that for the next year and a half. And at the same time, my good friend Santiago and I decided that we needed to try to keep the community and the legacy of the Assemblage going. And we formed this collective community called Converge. And initially we were creating offerings on Zoom, like online meditations and gatherings and stuff like that. And we wanted to build a platform for our friends who are these wonderful facilitators and teachers and guides to reach new clients and to stay in touch with their clients and students around the world. So initially we were looking into building an online platform or an app or something like that, but we decided to focus on the community first. And as the world started to slowly open back up and we could have some outdoor gatherings, I started to lean into my expertise of working in events and bringing people together to host some in-person gatherings like meditation, sound healing, cacao ceremonies, things like that. And from there, in the summer of 2020, those events are still going today regularly into 2024. And I encourage you to check out our website, convergewith.us, and or follow us on social media and that same handle, and join in one of our offerings and gatherings if you're in the New York City area. We're soon to launch some more online content, virtual workshops, and retreats coming soon. And I want to take a step back to add a little bit more about my own personal journey of spiritual growth and connection to my own practice. Going back to when the assemblage was still open, I attended my very first cacao ceremony hosted by my dear friend Florencia Friedman. And when I went to the first one, I hadn't met her yet, but I'd heard wonderful things from other people in the community. And I entered the room and heard her singing this beautiful song that I recognized, but I wasn't sure where from. And after sitting in the circle and hearing the song a little bit more, I was like, I have a remix of this song that I've been playing in my DJ sets. So after the circle that day, I played the song for her, and that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. A few weeks after that, or a few months after that, rather, Florencia's teacher, Nana Marina Cruz, who is the spiritual leader of the Sutahil Maya people from Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, had come to New York to do some ceremonies and talks and things like that. And at the Assemblage's holiday market is where I met her and got to connect with her for the first time. And I really identified with her energy and the tradition of the Mayan people. So I began to really dive more into learning about that. And once the lockdown happened, Florencia was hosting daily cacao ceremonies on Zoom for the community, which was so beautiful as a way to keep people together and connected in community while we were all locked off individually. And she did that for a few months. And during that time, I did her online apprenticeship class, learning about the Mayan traditions and the medicine of cacao. And a few months after that, accompanied her and some more of our friends down to Guatemala, to Nana Marina's home in Lake Atitlan. And that trip in February of 2022 was another one of the pivotal points of my life. So being on the Mayan land and meeting the Mayan elders there, visiting their sacred sites, that was so beautiful for me. And that trip was also so many firsts for me. My first time in Guatemala, visiting the Mayan holy sites, but also there were several other elders from different traditions that were sharing their medicine as well. There were two Mexica abuelas from Mexico that I did my first Temazcal sweat lodge with them, which was beautiful to participate in. There was another elder from the Brazilian Amazon, Yobu Hunikuin, who was the first time that I ever tried hape, which is a tobacco snuff that is blown up your nose, which was very interesting for me. I'd never had anything up my nose before, and it's a very interesting experience of meditation. And also, Yobu served us on that last night of the Wayeb ceremony of Mayan New Year. That was my first ayahuasca ceremony. And at that point, I'd been a little over 2 years sober and really focused on my meditation practice and how deep I could go without any additional substances or stimulation. And I was invited to ayahuasca ceremonies before, but I had always declined because I didn't feel like it was the right time or place. And when I was there in Guatemala at the sacred lake and the Mayan lands, surrounded by so many Mayan elders, with a chief from Brazil, from the Amazon, I was like, okay, this is the time, this is the right place. I felt very safe, it was the right container, and had a beautiful experience in that time. And after that trip, Nana Marina had given me her blessing to share the medicine of cacao with my community and start to host my own circles and ceremonies. And I started doing those regularly when returning back to New York. And I still host these circles every new moon and occasionally on full moons or other events in the wheel of the year, like solstices and equinoxes and stuff like that, usually combined with a song circle or breath work or sound journey, some kind of meditation. Beautiful community gatherings that we host in New York and sometimes pop-ups in other places a couple times a month. And I also work with a music festival in California called Lightning in a Bottle, where just a couple of months after that first experience in Guatemala, I got to meet several other indigenous elders who came to that music festival, including some members of the Yawanawa tribe, also from the state of Acre in the Amazon in Brazil, neighbors to the Hunikuin, who I had met that first time. And they invited me to a ceremony with them after the festival. And that was another beautiful experience. And from then, there were multiple other opportunities with different elders from different tribes passing through New York, where I would assist in finding venues for their concerts and helping to promote and bring people out to those gatherings, and getting to learn with them, study with them, do some more ceremonies. And of course, the music was one of the biggest connecting factors for me. And I really am so obsessed with the music of these indigenous tribes, the Hunikuin, the Yawanawa, the Ashaninka. There's so many beautiful medicine songs that I've been able to start to learn some of them and share some of them in my own circles and ceremonies. And I, after college, had been very shy about singing in public. It had been years since I'd done that. And at the stern encouragement of my teacher, Nana Marina, insisted that I sing in some of her ceremonies. And from there, it's been such a beautiful activation of my voice, my throat chakra, to be able to share these kinds of songs. And that's been giving me such joy over these last few years. So that brings us to today. As I said, this is July 2024. It's the day before my 39th birthday. And I really have been thinking about bringing this podcast back to life. I have a bunch of recorded episodes that have only been on Facebook so far, and I'm going to start to release them on YouTube and Spotify and other places where you listen to podcasts, because I think right now the world needs this medicine, these messages of all these different spiritual paths that people might resonate with. And I hear the stories of some really incredible people, and maybe one of these spiritual paths will resonate with you and you'll want to learn more about them, and you can connect with these teachers there. And I hope you follow along with this journey that I'm going to be sharing more of my own depths of my self-discovery and connecting with these other practices. It's been such a blessing of my life to hold gatherings in person in New York and in other places, like at the festivals in California, but I really want to start sharing more online. For 3 years, I did Instagram live challenges of daily meditation at the beginning of the year. So in 2021, it was a 21-day meditation challenge with different guest facilitators each day. So we'll have more of these online challenges and activities and community building. And I'm so excited to continue this journey with you all. I hope this resonates with you and you continue to follow along. If you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, following, so we can continue on this journey together. Let me know if something resonated with you, if you want to learn more about any of the topics that I shared about, and I'm happy to start sharing more of these episodes that I've recorded already and start to record more new interviews from experts in spirituality, health, well-being, wellness, and some conscious entrepreneurs, people working on really cool startups or NGOs that are helping with the environment. I really resonate with all of the indigenous activism of the people on the front lines that are the ones that are really facing climate change firsthand. And they're the ones that are protesting the oil companies drilling in the Amazon forest and all of these protected lands. I feel honored to be able to dialogue with those people and to help coordinate some gatherings and fundraisers to help give them the support that they need to continue that fight for our planet. So I really am excited to be on this journey, and please look out for more of these episodes. If you subscribe, they'll come to you automatically. You can find me on Instagram at Joey Greiner, and the website is convergewith.us with our upcoming events. That's also our Instagram handle for the wellness community, and would love to see you at an event soon or a dialogue with you here virtually until we can connect in person someday. All right, thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.